Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And the Financial Services Subcommittee has jurisdiction that ranges fairly widely through agencies and activities. We oversee things such as the collection of taxes, financial regulation, the White House, District of Columbia, the federal courts, the GSA, and the SBA. And the bill before us today provides for $16.97 billion of discretionary funding. That is about $4.3 billion less. That's about 20% less than last year, the 2013 CR. And it's about $7 billion less than what was requested. And I think we all recognize that that's a fairly substantial reduction, but it's necessary to make sure that we comply with the House-passed budget resolution and also to deal with the federal government's problem in spending from time to time. It was a real challenge to do this bill, but we did our best. One of the things we did was set priorities. We took the areas of the federal government that we think are essential, and we tried to provide adequate funding for them. Areas that aren't so essential or had a history of wasting taxpayers' dollars reduced in their funding. And so, for instance, one of the priorities in this bill is law enforcement. We fund the operations of the federal courts, the D.C. courts. We fund the supervision of offenders and defendants that are living in our communities, fund some of the drug task force areas, and also we try to say that there are times when we ought to fund the Treasury as it attempts through its anti-terrorism activity and its financial intelligence activities. Another important area in this bill is our support for small business. We try to assist the private sector in the creation of jobs. We continue to fund the Small Business Administration Small Business Loan Program. They have small business grant programs. We also say to some of the regulatory agencies, we'd like you to give a report to this committee about how you're doing in an effort to eliminate some of the burdensome regulations that maybe are outdated, maybe are a little bit duplicative. Now, when you look at the IRS, I think everybody is aware of some of the problems they've had, not just wasting taxpayers' money on lavish conferences around the country, but also singling out individual groups based on their political philosophy, giving them extra scrutiny, and some would argue intimidating those groups. And so we try to help the IRS regain some of its lost trust by the American people. We make them more accountable for the money that they're spending now, and we try to put in safeguards to make sure that they don't continue to do these kind of activities and maybe prevent them in the future. So what we do is we reduce the funding for the IRS by 24%. That's a little more than the 20% that the entire bill has been reduced through this allocation. We withhold 10% of the funding for the Enforcement Division until they implement the 9 recommendations that the Inspector General has suggested. And we also restrict their spending on conferences and bonuses and videos until those expenditures have been deemed appropriate. And we also looked at the GSA, and we find that they've wasted money from time to time, and so their funding has been reduced by $2.4 billion. One other area, the IRS, at a time when the IRS has betrayed the trust of the American people, we think it's a bad time to give them more responsibility, especially in the areas of health care. So this bill provides that no funds under this bill will be used to implement the individual mandate of the Affordable Health Care Act, and no funds will be transferred from HHS to IRS to do the same. Finally, a couple of more areas that we deal with. We reduce the funding in IRS, reduce funding in the GSA. We also eliminate 10 programs that we didn't think were very essential in these very difficult times. So that's in front of us. As far as the White House, the Executive Office of the President, the salaries and expenses in those accounts are reduced. We figured they ought to lead by example like we're trying to do and other areas of the government are doing. And finally, I would say about some of the Dodd-Frank agencies that have been created. Some of them were purposefully created outside this appropriation process, so they're not subject to our annual review. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, $500 million, and they don't have any responsibility to tell us how they're spending their money. So we provide some transparency and some accountability, ask them to report to us, and also to be subject to the same kind of appropriation review that other agencies are. And I certainly want to thank all the members of the subcommittee for their involvement, their input, their participation in the 11 hearings we had, including 2 with the IRS. Thank our staff, both the majority staff and the minority staff. They worked awfully hard to bring us to this point. Thank Chairman Rogers for moving the bill along. And say a special thank you to the ranking member, Mr. Serrano. He used to be chairman of this subcommittee, and when he was the chairman, he treated everyone with respect and dignity and fairness, did an outstanding job, and now that he's the ranking member, he has had valued input into this bill. And I'm sure that he will say that he wishes there was additional funds in this bill. I know that because he's told me that sometimes in English, sometimes in Spanish, but I've gotten the message. But I look forward to working with him as we proceed. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.